Right, there are no apologies, and we'll move on now to the confirmation of the agenda. I move from the chair that the agenda is published be seconded Councillor Vandervis.
Sorry, I was hoping to suggest a change.
Right. Seconded Councillor Staines, Councillor Vandervis.
I just thought in the interest of time saving, since it's a very expensive business having these meetings, that minutes for community boards 9 through to 14, if they perhaps could all be taken together unless someone has something individual to say.
I'm sorry, what are you suggesting, that we take 9 to 14?
9 to 14, just that we tick them off en masse rather than have to go through individually, unless anyone has anything individual to say.
Well, it probably doesn't need a change of agenda for that. It's a process issue. I'd be guided by Ms Graham as to whether that is possible, but we can come to that when we get there. So I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Declaration of interest is for noting, and then on to, I'll move from the chair, item 4, that the minutes of the meeting of the Dunedin City Council held on the 29th of June 2015, including the non-public part of the meeting, be confirmed as a correct record. Seconded. Seconded Councillor Noon. Any discussion on that? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. On to item 5, minutes of committees. Hearings Committee, Councillor Noon.
Thank you, Worship. I'll move 5A, which is the objection to the menacing dog classification, so that the public part of the minutes of the Hearing Committee meeting held on the 24th of March 2015 be noted, and also 2, that Part C, Item 1 of the minutes of the Hearings Committee meeting held on the 24th of March 2015 be taken in the non-public part of the meeting.
Okay, and seconded Councillor Lord. Any discussion on that? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
And I'll further move, Your Worship, 5B, that the minutes of the Hearings Committee meeting held on the 2nd of April 2015 be noted.
Seconded Councillor Lord. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
And finally, 5C, that the minutes of the Commissioner hearing held on the 28th of April 2015 be noted.
And that is seconded Councillor Lord. Discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. On to item 6, Economic Development Committee, Councillor Staines.
Thank you, Your Worship. I move that the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 13th of July 2015 be noted.
Seconded Councillor Bezet. No discussion. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 7, Finance Committee, Councillor Thompson.
I'll move that the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held on the 13th of July 2015, including the non-public part of the meeting, be noted.
Seconded Councillor Calvert. Any discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Item 8, Development Contributions Hearing Subcommittee, Councillor Thompson.
I'll move that the minutes of the Development Contributions Hearing Subcommittee meeting held on the 18th of February in 2015, including the non-public part of the meeting, be noted.
Seconded Councillor Hall. Any discussion? Put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Now, moving on to Councillor Vandervis's suggestion that we put all of, move all the minutes of the community boards together. Ms Graham, procedurally, is that?
The standing orders simply require that minutes from community boards are taken, so it doesn't say individually, so I would suggest that it is possible.
Items 9 through 14, please.
Seconded.
Seconded Councillor Noon.
Would need to be moved by someone who's a member of a community board, I would suggest.
All right, so
I'll move 9 to 14.
it doesn't have to be seconded by someone who, no, so it can be moved. Councillor Noon, seconded Councillor Calvert. Is there any discussion on any of those? There's not. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 15, the Waipori Fund. Who's? And Richard. Well, so, Councillors, I'll put Gavin and Richard here if you would like to ask any questions. Any questions? Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Gavin, in regards to the short-term deposits and fixed interest, making up quite a contribution, 40% of the portfolio, versus their return, is there any thought of increasing into more of the property or some of the equities?
Yeah, I can answer that one. One thing with the short-term deposits, we probably have, well, we are a little bit overweight in that category, and we are trying to actually increase our exposure to longer-term fixed interest. One difficulty we have had is accessing good quality corporate bonds to do so. One thing with the portfolio is Craig's Investment Partners, who manages the equities side of it for us. One theme they have is that the property equities are fully valued at the moment, and they don't necessarily offer kind of attractive prospects going forward, given they're fully priced at the moment.
Really quick, Councillor Lord.
Gavin, I don't want to answer this one, but I'm just wondering, is there any sort of tension at the moment? Like, just looking from the outside, it looks to me like we're at this top of a fairly sort of big peak at the moment. Is there any concerns in the next few months, or are you looking at any concerns that we might take a bit of a bath along with everyone else? Or?
Yeah, as far as returns in equity markets go, they have been fairly negative of late. One thing which has assisted the Waipori Fund is the large fall in the Kiwi dollar. It's come back quite dramatically since the highs earlier this year, and that is actually benefiting the fund, given that offshore equities and offshore assets aren't actually hedged. So that's assisting the fund at the moment, even though everything is looking quite negative globally.
No further questions? Okay, would someone like to move? Councillor Tavish, seconded Councillor Lord. Discussion? Well, can I just comment that it is good to see that the fund has reached its full value, which has been of concern over the last few years as we, as successive councils, took dividends at the expense of the value. So it's really encouraging to see that we've got to that. I guess the nagging doubt is, of course, that the change in values, it could all go south just as quickly, purely because of values, nothing to do with what we did. So we do have to recognise that there's some parts of it that are beyond our control, but that is very encouraging. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, on to item 16, the proposed National Environmental Standard for Plantation Forestry. This is a submission. Nicola, welcome. Item 16, councillors, is I'll open it up for questions for a start. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for your work on this, because it's an interesting topic, but the one matter that we deal with, or potentially could deal with under the second generation plan, that I couldn't get my head around in relation to this is preventing or preventing forestry where you may want to protect a renewable energy source. And while it talked about boundaries and yard boundaries against and protecting from some like sunshine hours, it didn't talk about wind, the potential to disrupt a wind source for, say, wind turbines. And I was just wondering, was there any thought, because we can deal with that under a district plan, potentially, whether we want to or not is another matter, but this seemed to me that that area was one that wasn't covered off potentially under this Act, and it could cause a conflict, or this proposed plan.
Through you, Your Worship.
No, that wasn't something that I think was raised in the NES, so presumably if it's not in the NES, it wouldn't give us the right to limit forestry planting in terms of its location to renewable energy generation. So if that's something that's seen as a concern, then that's something that we should sit in on.
Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
On 16.7, table 1, why is there a 30-metre setback for reserve land owned or managed by a TA, and for private property only 10 metre?
This was something that was raised by our Parks and Reserve staff. They believe that shading reserves requires greater than a 10-metre setback. They thought 30 metres is required. So that's where that 30-metre figure came from.
Well, the shading issue could refer to private property as well, and also with forestry for the height of the trees falling on boundary fences.
Through your worship, the 10 metres just refers to a setback from a neighbouring property. There is greater setbacks where there's a dwelling on that property, or it's a residential zone. It's proposed that forestry be set further back. So this really, I guess, refers to what's the land itself rather than any buildings or dwellings on that adjacent property. So reserve staff, the Parks and Reserve staff, raised that in relation to uses of adjacent reserves. But I guess if this feeling is that there might be impact on land on an adjacent property rather than just dwellings, and that's something that we want to raise, then we could look at that as well.
Yeah, well, the height of the tree is like your radiata grow reasonably high, and they do shade large portions of farmland, which can make a lot of it useless.
Yes, depending on obviously the orientation of the forestry, north or south of that adjacent land.
Any further questions? Councillor Lord.
Look, Michael, I was just at page 16.8, I was just wondering the top bullet point, why is it important that forestry species must be replanted the same species? Just why is it necessary that forestry that's been cut over must be replanted the same species?
That's not necessary. I guess the point that's raised there is that with afforestation, with new planting, there is a measure in place to control the risk of wilding spread. Whereas with the replanting, that measure wasn't in place, so our concern was that either specified that replanting should be in the same species or applied the same wilding tree risk calculation to that replanting measure. So probably that latter step would be the better one, rather than necessarily saying you have to replant in the same species.
Councillor Kell.
So with both those issues that Councillor Hall and Councillor Lord raised, are you going to do something different in response to it? You've said, yes, we could do something to both those. Does that mean that we should be encouraging you to put something in for both the shading of possible rural land and the replanting?
Yeah, I think with Councillor Lord's point, we do cover that off in the submission, although we could clearly say that we want the wilding calculation to be applied to replanting as well as afforestation, rather than specifying that the species should be the same. I think we can change the submission to reflect that. With Councillor Lord's, Councillor Hall's point, we can look at that. If you think that forestry should be set back greater than 10 metres from the boundary of land, any land, then that's something that we can investigate. I know that this is something that forestry companies, for instance, feel very strongly about in terms of limiting the amount of land that they can plant and a restriction on their activity. It's something that causes them a lot of consternation, and they sometimes see an equity issue in terms of the standards that apply to them that don't apply to other land use activities. So I'm just signalling to you that this is something that is quite controversial.
Councillor Hall.
It could be reworded to make it 30 metres, unless approved from adjoining landowners, because with forestry, the landowner next door has a responsibility of keeping a fire break, not the forestry company. When they plant on your boundary, you have to keep your land clear to prevent a fire. And that should not be. It should be the forestry owner's responsibility to keep their own fire break.
Can I suggest you work up, if you wish to change the submission, you need to work, we need to get, we'll put it in a resolution and we'll have a vote on it, and I'll finish off the questions and then come back to that, because that's the way we will adjust it. Councillor McTavish, question.
Yeah, I was just going to elucidate that issue a little further. It is the case that quite often in rural areas, adjacent land uses will need to be set back, or there will often be a request from companies requesting a setback from forestry, which often imposes constraints on the ability of existing or adjacent landowners to fully use their own rights. Is that right?
Sorry, what was your example? Do you have an example of that, sorry?
So, for example, a building of a shed or on an existing, on a rural piece of land adjoining a forestry block, it's not irregular for us to get submissions from the forestry companies asking for a setback from their activity, which encroaches on the land use rights of the adjacent landowner.
I'm not familiar with that over and above the setbacks that we have in our district plan anyway for any building from its boundary. So I'm not personally familiar with that. So.
Councillor Vanders, a question.
I was wondering if perhaps something that might partially satisfy Councillor Hall's concern regarding shading was that you might want to suggest a 30-metre setback on south-facing boundaries. But of course that doesn't get over the fire break issue. So my question really now is, given that there are a number of issues and some of them seem to have some substance, do we have time in which to alter this to satisfy the concerns of the experienced rural members amongst us?
Well, we can deal with it now. As I said, we can have a resolution put and a motion put and we'll vote on it. Okay. So, are there no further questions? So, Councillor Hall, you're basically moving that the setback specified on 16.7 for adjoining property be 30 metres rather than 10.
Okay, and you can leave the wording behind unless approved by other adjoining owners. So if they can negotiate the owner, they can plant closer.
All right, I'll get you to speak. You're going to second that? That's seconded, Councillor Calvert. Right, Councillor Hall, do you wish to speak to it substantively?
I noticed that in a fair few of the forestry areas now, adjoining road lines, the forestry are actually planting natives in that strip. So if the forestry want to plant close to a boundary, they might be encouraged to plant natives in that 30-metre strip and look after it and maintain it as a fire break themselves rather than rely on their neighbours.
So, Councillor Hall, do you wish to add that? What I'm hearing is that you might be saying 30 metres setback or native planting. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Second, happy with?
Yes or no, may be dealt with because it says plantation forestry, and that would be non-plantation forestry. So if it's 30 metres back for plantation forestry, then they could do things in there anyway without, according to these words.
I'm not quite sure I understand what the distinction you're making.
Well, it says in 15, increased setbacks for plantation forestry. So if it's a 30-metre setback for plantation forestry, regardless of the neighbours, then that deals with if they want to do something that's not plantation forestry in that 30 metres, it's fine. You don't need to add to the resolution.
I understand, thank you. Okay, are there further speakers to this? Councillor Wilson.
No.
Councillor Bazet.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask the staff if they have any sort of negative feelings about this proposal, because I'm not sure of the implication. I mean, I understand the difference between 10 metres and 30 metres, but I mean, is that going to impinge on what you're recommending?
My feeling is it is a little onerous on forestry companies, and I guess to ameliorate that concern, the north versus south aspect of it could be taken into account. Well, if you're requiring a 30-metre setback for forestry on the north side of the land, I guess, rather than if it's on the south face of blocks of land, then it's not going to have that shading influence. I mean, it's pretty difficult to write that, I guess. But
so you would suggest that you might restrict it to south facing?
Yes.
Properties. How do the mover and seconder feel about that?
Doesn't sort all the...
Well, Councillor White.
I think we leave it at the 30, if we can go to the 30 metres, unless approved by the adjoining landowner. So
That's right.
if they want to go closer.
That's right. I'm just clarifying the motion. That's all.
Because, you know, it's affecting the forestry owner by the amount of planting he can do, but they're not taking into account the amount of damage it's doing to the pastoral farmer next door.
Understand that. Any further speakers? Councillor Coe.
I understand that we don't understand thoroughly enough about the effect of it for my preference, but why I particularly would like this to go ahead is that what we're signalling otherwise is that when our parks and reserves people say that they want protection, we just drop it in there, and then when our ratepayers might have an issue with it, we're just saying, oh well, it's a bit too hard when it's our, and we shouldn't be protecting our own land in a way that we don't want to protect our ratepayers' land. So I think it's important that we don't try and say it's not all right in one case and it is all right in the others. It's either an all right thing or it isn't an all right thing.
Councillor McTavish.
Just to tease out further the implications of this, it means that unless you have a block that is greater than 60 metres by 60 metres, you will not be able to plant anything.
Yes.
Thank you.
We shelter belt.
Councillor Bazet.
I read somewhere where the submission date was closed off last week, is that right? No. So how much time have we got for this?
It's August.
My concern is that, and not arguing against what Councillor Hall has suggested, it might be a very good suggestion, but I don't like making decisions around a table like this where the implications might be quite significant for another party, and I would rather we do nothing and then find out just exactly what is the best way to accommodate the suggestions that have been made by Councillor Hall, and maybe there is a strong argument coming from staff against what he's proposing, but I'd like to hear that, and so I would not like to support something going through today.
Okay. Further speakers? Right, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Sorry, is this just that amendment?
Just that amendment.
So we can do it.
Yeah, this is, sorry, I should have clarified. This is an amendment to the submission. The substantive motion on the submission will come later. So this is simply voting on whether to add or to amend the submission as presented in our papers. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Could I have a show of hands? All those in favour, please put their hand up.
Sorry, can we have clarification on the motion? I know you've just repeated yourself, Your Worship, but you know what you're talking about the amendment and what not the amendment that Councillor Hall has been alluding to. So it is.
This is the amendment.
Sorry, okay. Well, that,
effectively, what we're doing.
I don't think that was quite clear, so I would be voting against it.
Right. Okay. So all those in favour, please put their hands up. All those against? It's lost. Okay. Yes, did you have?
Well, I'd like to propose another amendment.
Right.
And that is that we protect the ability of the council being able to protect as I indicated earlier, that where there is a wind generation or renewable energy resource up and running, that can be protected by the district plan or other council-led tools, and that right isn't taken away from councils to be able to protect that. It may well be done as a requiring authority, but there may well be that wind turbines will be...
Right. I need the clear wording for the motion.
My motion is that we add to this motion a clause seeking the TLA have delegated authority or continue to have ability under the district plan to manage conflicts where it comes to renewable energy.
Could you just make sure that, please? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor McTavish. So this is, just to be clear, this is another amendment. Awesome. And I'll get it typed up and put on the wall, on the screen, so that we know exactly what we're...
Worship, I should have said right from the front end, I should have removed myself, which I have now, and I've noted that to Pam, so everyone's aware. I have an interest in forestry. So.
I'm sorry, I should have known that. I was aware and I didn't know that, so thank you.
Your Worship, are we able to suggest another amendment as staff?
Oh, sorry. Disembodied voice was coming.
Michael's got just one further suggestion.
It's just by way of correction, Your Worship, and it's, I don't have your page numbering, I'm sorry, but in the letter to MPI on page 2, paragraph 4, where it lists the activity status of forestry proposed under the second generation plan, it goes from, it says from restricted discretionary through to non-complying. That should read from permitted through to non-complying. So depending on...
This is in paragraph 4?
Paragraph 4, yes.
16.6.
So it should be the second last line of that paragraph. Activity status is ranging from...
Permitted.
Permitted. So that's a... I don't think we need a resolution on that if that's a correction, but I draw everyone's attention to it in case it changes anybody's perception of the meaning, assuming we all know the difference. Right.
Let's see.
Right, the proposed, the motion is on the wall. Councillor Wilson, would you wish to speak?
Well, there's two aspects of this. One is just wind turbulence that plantation forestry beside wind turbines can generate, but also actually the ability of water sources to the quantity of water that can be taken up with plantation forestry in areas that already have dams and the like can be, they can absorb a lot of the moisture that otherwise it's relied on by hydropower. And I think that that friction is better dealt with at a local authority level than being dealt with by, as proposed under this provision, which would take those powers away from us. So I think there's a really good discussion to be had on how we deal with these things. I'm not sure what our district plan is going to provide in relation to protecting any of these energy generation systems, but I think we should ensure that those abilities stay with the TLAs.
Councillor Calvert?
Can I ask a question of the mover? I'm not, or whoever it is, I don't know whether we can, the territorial authority is able to manage conflicts under the district plan. I mean, either we can or we can't, but I don't understand how, we could submit that we could or couldn't, so I just don't quite understand that first half.
Any observations on that?
Well, I think we can manage conflict under the district plan. I'm not quite sure. Are those two clauses or parts of the sentence are linked to each other. I mean, it reads a little bit like it's conflict in general, rather than conflict. Yeah, rather than conflict between renewable energy generation and forestry.
So I'm not sure what wording is about to be changed.
Why don't you just make it so that it reads as a seconder, the territorial authority to manage conflicts between renewable energy generation and forestry under the district plan.
Councillor Calvert, does that clarify your... I didn't respond to the question.
Yes, and is it intending the territorial authority to be any territorial authority anywhere? It's allowing a territorial authority rather than a specific one.
Yeah. Okay. Do you wish to speak to it as well?
For the third time?
Okay, further speakers.
No, please. No, thank you.
Further speakers? Right. Councillor Daniels.
I don't think that we're empowered to pass a motion that binds any territorial authority. I think that Councillor Calvert is exactly right. If we want to specify a particular territorial authority, we need to. And I'm not sure that in any event that putting in a submission allowing the territorial authority to do something that they can't already do is actually viable either. So on two legal counts, first of all, the universality of this clause as it reads, it's simply not viable, you can't do it. And secondly, I don't believe that it is possible in this context for us to go beyond the normal reach that we as a territorial authority would have in any event. So I'll be voting against on both counts.
That can be addressed in the right of reply in any case. Any further speakers? Councillor McTavish.
Only to say, Your Worship, that the purpose of a national or an NES, National Environmental Standard, is to provide universality of rules across the country. So to ask for something in an NES that referred only to one territorial local authority would be ultra vires.
Okay. Further speakers? Councillor Wilson, do you want to exercise your right of reply?
Your Worship, this is an area that won't relate to every territorial authority, but those that wish to manage those potential conflicts, I believe, should be able to have those powers as they have now. And that's why I wanted to make sure that those powers weren't taken off us potentially under an NES that dealt with plantation forestry. I think it's just about ensuring that we plan well for our city, as I think our planners do. Thank you.
Right. I'm going to put it. Now, bear in mind this is an amendment to the published draft submission. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. That's Councillor Vander's recorded as vote against. It's carried. Okay. Councillor McTavish.
Can I try the patience of the meeting just by testing a version of Councillor Hall's motion, that being the amended version which was suggested by staff, so that we add a setback from adjoining property under different ownership where plantations are to the northeast of adjoining land only of 30 metres. So the 10 metre setback would apply where it was adjacent to in almost all directions, except for where the plantation forestry is to the northeast of the adjoining land, under which circumstance a 30 metre setback would apply. I may not be the seconder.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hall. Do you wish to speak further to it, Councillor?
No, that was my concern with it, was the universality of that rule. I'm comfortable with the need for it on the northeast, and that's why I'm suggesting this.
Can I ask why the northeast and not the northwest, or am I missing something?
So my understanding is that it's early morning sun, which is important to get things like frost off the ground, but I stand to be corrected on that if that's not right.
Could you come up and provide Pam with the wording for that, please? Councillor Wilson.
I'd happily support this. The only problem is with the wording because it doesn't take into account the terrain, which can have quite a bearing on that as well. It could be to the south. Yeah, so I think if we do it in a way that doesn't necessarily deal with, if we give them the staff general ability to put a submission in and trust that they will talk about the terrain and the distance in a way that's actually meaningful, because I think just northeast is not necessarily satisfactory if the land is on a hill, really.
So, with taking into account that, which I hadn't considered, moving a motion that asks staff to insert a setback for areas in which shading was likely to cause significant issues.
Those are safety issues rather than just amenity issues, yeah?
Okay, are there any further speakers to this before? I'll give everyone the opportunity to speak to it once it's on the screen, but if anyone feels confident. Okay, it's on the screen now. So the term northeast has been omitted. That was deliberate, Councillor McTavish?
Sorry?
The term northeast has been omitted.
It has been omitted because I think Councillor Wilson's point in terms of terrain is a significant one.
So you both, mover and seconder, are happy with this? Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, Councillor McTavish, you'll write a reply because we're at that point.
Well, the question has just been asked by Councillor Calvert, different to what ownership, and I'm simply referring to the table under 15, which talks about adjoining property under different ownership other than TA. So
okay.
It's the subsidiary clause of that.
So do you wish to exercise your right of reply?
Well, I think that will be.
Look,
no.
I don't want to have cross conversations here that nobody else can hear. We're trying to inform this debate. So you don't wish to exercise your right of reply? All right, okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now, we'll go on to the substantive recommendation, which is that on page 16.1, the Council considers and approves the attached draft submission on the proposed natural environmental standard for plantation forestry with the amendments that have been passed. You're moving, Councillor Wilson, seconded Councillor McTavish. Is there any further discussion? Councillor McTavish.
I think those staff that have worked on this have done a pretty good job considering the technical nature of it, and obviously I think it's one of those topics which has significant implications for us, but which is a pretty dry topic to get your head around. So I'd just like to thank staff for putting their head to what the implications of this will be locally, and I think doing a pretty comprehensive job of that.
Okay. Any further speakers? Oh no, that was your right of reply, was it? Oh no, that was it. No further speakers. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you. Now we move on to item 17, submission to the ORC Regional Policy Statement. Second prize is 2 goes. Okay. Right. I'll open it up for questions for a start as per normal. Any questions, councillors? Councillor McTavish.
Thank you, Bishop. I'll find my questions. The first one just relates to regionally significant issues, and I note in the introduction on page 17.7, fourth paragraph down, we state that our main interest is ensuring that the RPS provides a clear and consistent message in how regionally significant issues will be addressed into the future. I note that the proposed RPS for Otago as it currently stands doesn't actually identify regionally significant issues, and I wondered why that has not been identified, given that we say it is our main interest, why we have not identified that as something which is missing in terms of section 32 of the RMA and its requirements, and whether that is of concern to staff.
In response to that, they are difficult to find, but they are in there if you look hard.
Can you identify them for us?
Yes. And this kind of comes back to our overall comments on the layout of the RPS and how the ORC have chosen to structure it, and where the issues are as part of that. For example, in Chapter 1, on page 16 of the RPS, if you've got a copy there, they're underneath the objectives in the chapter overview, hidden in the table at the front.
Yeah. So when I read through the RPS and identified that table, to me the issues that had been highlighted there were so high level and broad as to not really constitute what I am familiar with as regionally significant issues and other regional policy statements around the country. Would that be consistent with your analysis of those issue tables?
Yes.
Does that give staff cause for concern in any way, or are you comfortable that regionally significant issues are clearly identified and give a clear and consistent message following on from those as to how they will be addressed?
Through the chair, I think we need to refer to the detailed table, the detailed submission that follows. So this is really just an overview. So I think if the issues which are set out in the detailed table are addressed, then I think we're satisfied that the regional issues will be covered.
So you're comfortable that that table on page 16 clearly identifies in a detailed way regionally significant issues for Otago in a sufficiently detailed way as to give us confidence that they will be addressed and that they are addressed?
No.
Thank you. Thank you. That would be consistent with my own analysis. My second question relates to, it's a generic question about the feedback that you're giving in the detailed feedback that follows. My reading of that is that a lot of it is seeking clarity around what words are being used and why, and whether or not the right words have been used or what the meaning of those words is. Would it be fair to say that without the clarity or the precision that one might hope for, it's difficult to give solid feedback about what our position is on on the intent of any of these provisions. So I guess in reading this, sometimes it feels that we're not actually giving feedback on the intention of a statement or a provision because we don't quite know what that provision means. Am I misreading that, or is that correct?
That is correct in some circumstances.
So under this process that we're going through, under the RMA, is it possible for us to request another phase to the submissions or another phase to the feedback, in which we might be able to, once they've firmed up on some of their provisions or had a think about some of that feedback that they're getting around the wording of provisions, that we might have another phase in which we can actually give them feedback about what we think about that firmed up language?
Through the chair, I'm not sure about whether formally there's another phase allowed, but we'd hope that we'd be have discussions with the ORC following this submission and talk about subsequent amendments with them.
So you would be comfortable with an insertion of something which requests a more iterative process, such that we can have clarity around what it is that they're proposing, effectively get a response to what they are asking here, and then provide feedback?
That would be really useful if we did that, I think.
And I guess my final high-level question is just around the second objective. The second objective seems to focus fairly solidly, or is it the second theme with theme 2, chapter 2, with the 3 objectives that sit under that. That is the chapter that is about protection of the environment. But each of those 3 objectives tends to refer to natural resources as the focus of any protection measures, rather than ecosystems or habitats. Given that you're seeking clarity around what natural resources means in one of your overarching comments, do you feel that we are able to state, as we do in our introduction, that we are comfortable with the degree of protection for biodiversity, or is that something that we might like to perhaps sit on until we understand whether or not that natural resources focus actually encompasses broader issues like ecosystems and habitats and the life-supporting capacity of soil, air, water and land?
I think we're happy with what natural resources is. I think it's defined in the RMA. It's just their use of it. Sometimes they talk about built resources, natural and physical resources, and there's a few different terms. So that's the clarity we're seeking, is around what they mean around those other terms that are similar but not quite the same.
So you're comfortable that the high-level objectives and the protection, in the area of protection and the protection theme, do not refer to ecosystems or the health of ecosystems. They simply refer to the constituent parts, which are those natural resources. Because to me, that strikes me as a bit odd.
Sorry, I'm just checking to see if there's a definition. I think there may be one for biodiversity, specifically in the RPS.
Yeah, I couldn't find a natural resources definition in the glossary, but stand to be corrected.
In general terms, the provisions relating to biodiversity, now that there are provisions relating to biodiversity in this draft as opposed to earlier drafts, that was really the basis for our more positive comments this time around, but not to say they're by any means perfect.
It is not in the glossary, it is in policy 2.1.6, which does describe aspects of biodiversity to be protected.
So that's a definition of natural resources in policy 2.1.6?
In part, yes.
Councillor Vanders.
I have a general question about how you think the ORC are going to receive this submission. I agree with Councillor McTavish in that it seems to consist largely of what words are being used and why, and what meaning those words might have. Given that the ORC believe that they know what they're doing, and that we're offering 30 pages of splitting hairs essentially over the meaning of words, how do you think the ORC are going to view 30 pages of that?
You're happy for you to answer that, but just note that you're asking the staff to effectively get into the minds of the ORC, and if they don't wish to do that,
which is what I'd hoped they would have done in the first instance, since not getting into their minds would make the submission process void.
No, that's not. That's nonsense.
Okay. So the reason for the approach taken is that this follows a series of discussions with the ORC, both at a staff level and at a councillor workshop level, where the high level issues have been raised before. Hence the references in our draft submission to building on previous feedback. So the high level issues have been discussed. We're now at the stage where the precise wording that goes into this document, if we have to give effect to the document, so we do need to focus on the precise wording. And I think that if you look at the prescribed format of submissions that the ORC send out with the document, it actually asks you to identify in columns what you're not happy with and what you'd like to see replaced. So I think at this stage in the process, they're expecting detailed feedback.
Any further questions? Would someone like to move? This is the recommendations on page 17.1.
Mr. Chairman.
Moved Councillor Vincent Pope. Is there a seconder? And
I think I know what Councillor Vincent Pope is going to move, but I have no idea, so I would wait and see what he's going to move, Your Worship.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also going to propose an amendment to extend A for reasons that must be obvious after the concerns that have been expressed around some editorial or detail issues, and also the previous conversation about the NPS on plantation forestry illustrates why it's not a very good idea for us to try and amend things on the hoof in this environment. And so, in addition to A, I wish to move that we approve the draft submission subject to minor editorial amendment, and that members of the council be asked to forward comment and suggestions to the group manager, community and planning for inclusion, provided that such comment is consistent with previous submissions and council policy. I think that should provide a sensible pathway forward. This process has had a considerable gestation period already. Many of us here were present at the forum with other TLAs and the ORC some months ago, where the higher level issues were discussed and where not a considerable amount of disagreement was highlighted. In some cases, disagreement between ourselves and other neighbouring TLAs also one should comment. And so I think it's appropriate for us to include in our submission whatever level of detail we want, some of which will line up with what other authorities are saying and some of which won't. The issue around the importance of this document, the RPS, relates to the hierarchy of these planning documents, and it's very important that we are as comfortable as we can be with what's said in that document in respect of how it affects our policies, which in specific terms must often align with what's being said. So given that there's a disagreement from a number of members of council about or a desire for more robust comment in the submission, and there's also there are also a number of issues around a desire for further clarity, I think this may provide us with a pathway forward that some lucky person can argue when the submission is presented to the regional council.
So, just to clarify, is there a seconder for this before we go into further? Councillor Wilson. Right, it's been moved and seconded. Can I just clarify, I take it that this replaces A of A and B on page 17.1? So there's still B.
We still need B, yes.
Yeah, yes. And
anyone else want to volunteer, that'll be fine.
can I clarify, given what this resolution suggests, can I clarify who will be making the decision about what gets included and what doesn't? Because I note that it might be consistent with previous submissions of policy, but there still needs to be a call on.
It seemed to me it'd be most appropriate for yourself and the Chief Executive to sign that off.
Well, I don't really mind whether it's me or someone else, but I think it ought to be in the resolution.
I'm happy for that to be it.
Your Worship, can we add one other point? Sorry, just just drawing your attention to the fact that we asked the ORC whether we could have an additional time period, and they've given us until tomorrow to confirm our submission. So we need to get, so we need to get comments overnight, please.
That's the implication. That's fine. That's the way it is. Okay. So this should be, Pam, this should be amended to. I think. Can I suggest? Sorry. That's fine. All right. So, do you wish to speak, Councillor Wilson?
I think the mover may forget where he is, and I think members should probably be changed to councillors.
Yep. Okay. And do you wish to say anything? Speak to it.
I'm going to support this. I was impressed by the opinion pieces that I did read by Bridget Irving in the ODT, which expressed concerns about the wording and the litigation that will come out of the RPS because it isn't clear enough, and hence I support the submission. I think we need clarity. This is far too important a document, and its bearing on our 2GP and whether they can be read together are far too important to have any room for extra litigation. And I think that we need that certainty as soon as possible. So I support the submission and the robust debate that the Chair of Planning and Environment is going to bring to it.
Councillor Vance.
I agree with Councillor Benson-Pope's statement that we should include whatever level of detail we want. I don't agree, however, that we should include the highest level of detail that anybody around this table wants. I want a level of detail which is so low that people will actually read it at the ORC, and that there won't be so much of this detail that it will obscure any kernels of relevance that might actually be there. I can't agree with the amended motion that's on the board there. What that does is give someone around the table here the right to change things overnight that we can't change here today. And I don't see that that is in any way democratic, and I don't see the point of giving someone license to fiddle with it overnight when we can debate it here today. I don't see what extra information or what additional pluses would be available by messing with it overnight. So in addressing this particular A that's proposed by Councillor Benson-Pope, I can see no point in it, and I can see dangers in it, especially since it doesn't specify who will actually decide what gets changed and what doesn't. Am I only able to speak to this at the moment, or can I speak to the general motion as well?
The motion is this one and B as it stands on the page.
Okay, so I can speak to both. In looking at this whole thing, I've had some discussions with senior ORC people fairly early on in the process, and my understanding is that their wanting to keep some of the wording fairly general has been deliberate, that they didn't want to be nailed down into specific extreme detail, and that there were very good and practical reasons for not wanting to be nailed down on any specific tiny detail. All the upper level stuff, all the major issues have been dealt with many months ago. We are now talking about, as Councillor McTavish said, what words are being used, why those particular words are being used, and what meaning those words might mean. If we're getting down to the point of delivering 30 pages of questioning what words might mean, I believe that we've just gone a level way too far in terms of detail. And I, in fact, will be voting against the whole thing on Councillor Benson Pope's suggestion that we include whatever level of detail we want. I think the level of detail that we should be supplying is a level which gets whatever real message we have through to the ORC in terms of the bigger issues, but doesn't get down to a very pedantic binding them to very specific, tiny, detailed meanings of words, because they are simply going to reject that out of hand, and anything valuable that we have to say risks being lost in that rejection. So getting back to my original idea that we really should be thinking about who we are sending these submissions to and how those people are likely to receive the submission. My view is that this 30 pages of quibbling over split-head decisions on what words mean is simply going to be shelved. And I think it's an exercise in futility, and we'll be voting against as a result.
Councillor Peake.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just disappointed that we've got to this stage, a proposed plan which is in such a state, because there's a world of difference between this process and the one that preceded it way back when, in the early 90s, I think. And it's, the difference is contained in one phrase: give effect to. This is directional to us, this policy statement, and should not contain fudgy and uncertain kinds of messages like avoid the adverse effects of pest species and the spread of pest species. How on earth do we deal with that? And all the other avoids that are in this document. So for me, it is. I'm sorry to see that we've got to a point now where I know the regional council's trying to give us a steer as to how we can manage its regional policy statement and how we can give effect to it. But really, terminology is very important. English is not a precise thing, but when it comes to a policy statement, I think we've got to have, we would expect more certain, more precise wording than what we've got. And so I don't mind that level of detail going back to the regional council, because I think there is. We had misgivings when we were first confronted with this, and we spoke up about them, as Councillor Benson Pope has said. Other territorial authorities also, other councils in Otago, were also concerned about the wording and about such issues as, if I wanted to see what this was all about, I would expect to see the significant regional issues up front. Right at the start, this is how we want you to deal with them and give effect through your plans to dealing with them. But we don't. We get them buried in the bottom of the proposal. So for me, I think we're caught with this time constraint, and we've just got to work with it as best we can. And I encourage the staff to work constructively with regional council staff to try and improve it. I did find in the opening statements in our submission were rather complimentary to the regional council, and it looked as though when you read that bit that there was a lot to be said for retaining most of it. But as you work through 30 or 40 pages, you can see there are some misgivings, and I hope we can work to improve this with the council.
Further speakers? Councillor McTavish.
Well, I've just been seeking feedback, Your Worship, from staff on some of the issues that I raised earlier and whether or not they would be able to be made as a result of this. One of them being the inclusion of, or the clear identification of regionally significant issues, because, and my concern is, we haven't previously submitted on them because they've been there. So the most recent version, they're not there, but we haven't submitted on that. So I was just questioning staff as to whether or not in that context we were able to make that change. But presumably because they were there historically, we were submitting on them, albeit because they were present rather than because they were absent. That would be consistent with our previous submissions.
Through the chair, that's correct. We believe that the resolutions you drafted there would be fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, I would just endorse the comments made by the Chair of Planning Regulatory and colleague Councillor Peake. I think it is imperative, you know, if there's one thing that this regional policy statement needs to do, it is to provide clarity. And at the moment, we have, I think, a comprehensive staff submission, which every second clause is asking for clarity, and that's not a helpful place to be in when we're trying to give useful feedback to the Otago Regional Council on this and the steer as to what our position is on the various different elements. So I think it is important that we include in our submission a request that they firm up some of that language, that they take on board some of the requests for clarity around whether maintain is the same as sustain, which is the same as protect, or whatever all of those other concerns are. For me, that the definition or what natural resources means is pretty imperative and has some pretty high level impacts right through that chapter 2, that second theme. There are a number of areas in which there is ambiguity, and that needs to be cleared up if we are to provide helpful feedback, and I'm sure that we're not the only ones in that situation. So I can't think of a better messenger than Councillor Benson Pope. I'm hoping that he'll take this message strongly to the ORC, and I'm looking forward to seeing our finalised submission tomorrow.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm struggling with this a little bit, one because I only picked up the papers this morning, but in looking through it, I have a lot of faith in the ORC going through this process. I do struggle with some of the wording from the DCC, but I think common sense will run out and the ORC will take on some of the points. I am worried about where some of this is going in relation to future economic development of the city. So I do have some reservations, but I think common sense will prevail, and so I will support it.
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's always disappointing when the Otago Regional Council and our neighbouring territorial authorities don't share the long-term... Can you hear me now? You're just there. Don't share some of the longer-term thinking that we have in this organisation, and I admit that we're not perfect, but I think that particularly in recent years we've come a long way in terms of more long-term thinking around resource management and environmental management more broadly. And it's a shame when those organisations don't share that long-term thinking, but it's dangerous for us when it comes to the regional policy statement because it directly impacts our capacity through the second generation district plan, due in no small part to my colleague on my right, to be more aspirational with our community when it comes to these sorts of questions, because we have to, as Councillor Peake said, give effect to the RPS in whatever form it eventually takes. And the lack of clarity in the language does make it difficult on some of the finer detail to know whether we support them or not. But I disagree with Councillor van der Vis. This isn't nitpicking. These are some fairly fundamental points that will have a huge impact, I think, when it comes to the development of a second generation district plan, and when it comes to questions around waste minimisation, around biodiversity, around ecosystems, around water use. These aren't nitpicking over details, these are fundamental differences in philosophy. And I think most disappointing for me is that to a large degree it seems that the Regional Council have confused an environmental management instrument with an economic development tool. And that is not the role of the regional policy statement, and it is a concern when one of the 4 pillars supposedly driving the environmental management instrument, the RPS, that the entire region's local authorities have to give effect to, is working backwards from the prosperity that human beings can derive from our natural environment in the short term. That is, and environmental management is the fundamental role of the Regional Council, and it's heartening to have Councillor Vandervis speak in favour of their function. It's not something that happens all too often around this table, but that is fundamentally their job. And by taking an economic development approach to environmental management, I think is an abrogation of their duty in that regard. So while it is, I agree with previous speakers, it's a shame that it's come to this, but we have on many occasions during this process flagged many of these issues, and they haven't been taken on board. And so as much as I applaud the diplomacy that staff have tried to approach this submission with, I think that that hasn't worked up until now. And I think we need to be a little more forthright with our concerns, given the impact that it has on our own policy development and our own planning. So hopefully between now and lunchtime, we will have a submission that better reflects the concerns around this table and the ambitions and aspirations in our community. Thanks.
I personally regret the fact that this draft regional policy statement is not in better shape at this stage of the process than it is. It is obviously lacking in clarity, and one of the hallmarks of any good legislation or policy is clarity. It wouldn't matter so much if it only affected the regional council's activities, but the fact is we are required as a council to give effect to this regional policy statement. So insofar as it's unclear, it puts this council at risk, litigation risk and expense further down the track, because it's not adequate, because it's unclear. So we don't just have a right to make suggestions here, we have an obligation in terms of managing our own risk going forward to endeavour to get this as clear as it can be for the future. And I further regret the fact that at the time when central government is quite understandably promoting the idea of consistency and common plans across regions, that the regional council can't see fit to accommodate the concerns of its neighbours and its district councils in the area around it. That to me is heading in the other direction. So I do support this, although at this stage I'm not hugely optimistic that it's going to be largely rewritten, and I think that the fundamental message we need to be giving them, and I'm sure it will be given, is that it's not clear and that we'll all pay the price, both councils, in terms of litigation, etc., which nobody needs further down the track simply because it hasn't been well enough done at the moment. Councillor Benson-Pope, your role of reply.
Thank you. Just briefly, I think most of the issues here have been canvassed. Certainly the interactions, meetings and discussions between our representatives and those of other authorities and the ORC excuse me, have been quite extensive. It's certainly true that the Otago Regional Council has taken a different attitude to this document from that taken by some other regions, and that may be right and that may be wrong, but whatever, as you illustrate, it presents us with some challenges. And I think while I don't expect to see major change overnight, literally, I hope this motion provides people who have issues around editorial content or approach or a particular paragraph or phrase will have the opportunity to communicate that to staff for your consideration and that of the Chief Executive in the final document that gets dispatched tomorrow for presentation to the Council.
Thank you, councillors. I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Councillor Vandervis, against? That's carried. Can I just observe we've had two submissions that have come before council at this meeting, and we have thrashed through them pretty constructively. But can I suggest that it would facilitate, particularly amendments in the future, if councillors could see fit to develop any amendment that they might have a day or two ahead and circulate it around other councillors if they wish to get some feedback on it, but be able to bring it to council in a worked up form. And I think that would facilitate amendments to these kinds of things in a much more streamlined and constructed way than I think we did pretty well getting it knocked into shape around here, but it would be better and would enable, if proposed amendments were circulated among other councillors, we could all get feedback before we get to the meeting, and they could be finalised ahead of time, and I think it would just make for better decision making. Councillor Bezet.
In addition to that, I think it's helpful if councillors have got questions that they also ask staff before they get to the meeting as well. Give staff the opportunity to be able to prepare their answers. I mean, there's nothing wrong with asking the question at the council meeting, but I think it's also helpful if the staff are aware of the sort of questions that might be coming forward.
Thank you for that. Okay. Right, on to item 18, heritage rates relief.
Worship, I'm happy to move. Just one request, if you take them separately, because I understand the Jetty Street Subcommittee road stopping, the road stopping subcommittee needs to sit out of item ENF, sorry. Yes.
And I'm sitting back.
So Councillor Calvert's sitting back, just you've got that. So ENF. So Councillor Noon, you're moving the recommendations as published on the...
Yes.
It's included in the paper? Okay. So we'll go down to D in that case. So there's a second, Councillor McTavish. So just to clarify, you're moving the recommendations A to D as printed on in the paper?
Yes.
Do you wish to speak to those in the first instance? Speakers, A to D. Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay. Now, you're now moving...
I'll move E and F together.
E and F, and Councillor McTavish, or you... Sorry. Who's seconding? Councillor Hawkins is seconding. So it's moved Councillor Noon, seconding Councillor Hawkins. And just... who's sitting out? Oh, no, Councillor Calvert is, but it's Councillor Lord, Councillor Wilson sitting out. Got that? Okay. Any discussion on E and F? Right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Councillor, we're going to item 19. This is the New Zealand-China Mayoral Forum. Welcome, Mr. Christie, Ms. Graham. And as usual, I've opened it up to any questions that anybody has. Councillor White.
Your Worship, can I just ask, in the endorsement, endorses the Mayor's visit to China in September 2015, noting you'll be accompanied by appropriate support staff. Can I ask what that support staff will be?
Me.
Mr. Christie, would you wish to answer?
One is to be determined, but Zhang Wei, our China project manager, will be in China at the time and will accompany the Mayor for that portion of his trip.
Councillor Vanders.
On 19.2, it talks about the need or the niceness of having the 20th anniversary gift for Dunedin being presented to the Mayor. I'm wondering, has there been other earlier opportunities, given there have been a lot of trips to China already, for this to happen, or would there be any opportunities in the future for this to happen? Is this really a justification for this additional trip?
We're taking advantage of this particular trip for the Mayor of Shanghai to present his gift to the Mayor of Dunedin, which has been worked on over the last 6 months. I guess the purpose of the trip is to actually attend the local government trip to Xiamen alongside other mayors, so that is the impetus for this timing. and I wouldn't be able to anticipate when the next offer would be available for the Mayor to visit Shanghai.
Any further questions? Okay, Councillor Lord, you're going to move. Secondly, Councillor Noon, do you wish to speak to it?
No, I'm okay. I think it's a good idea.
Sorry?
I think it's a good idea.
Councillor Van.
Stand up to say that.
I don't think it's a good idea unless there is some real identifiable value for yet another trip to China. We've had so many trips to China in Mayor Chin's reign that I suggested at the time that we could actually save the ratepayers a lot of money by buying a flat in Shanghai. And I never thought we'd see the same thing again under Mayor Cull, but it seems to me that it's like an ongoing. I really do wonder what the value is of all these trips overseas, especially when we have so many issues which need dealing here with at home. I will be voting against on the basis that we've had far too many of these already.
Further speakers? Councillor Noon.
I wasn't going to say anything, but Councillor Vandervis has inspired me once again. Look, there is a civic duty, regardless of what you believe in terms of the mayor visiting, whether it's sister cities or flying the flag for the city. It's important that the mayor is seen out and about. I know this is a heck of a long way to go, but accepting that there's other opportunities as the manager of Destination Enterprise Dunedin, I beg your pardon, has alluded to. They're taking advantage of the trip and ensuring that other things can be achieved at the same time. And for some reason, often these trips are seen as a soft target to perhaps indicate that council spending shouldn't be spent in these areas. But it is a relatively modest amount of money, and I do feel that the relationships with Asia in general, but particularly the city, Dunedin City, having a relationship with Shanghai, and the benefits that this city receives, whether it's educational or cultural or economic, the potential is huge. And I know Councillor Vandervis will say, show me the proof of what has been achieved up until now. You've only got to go and talk to school principals in the city and realise how many Chinese students come to the city for educational purposes. Then go and talk to the university as well, where it's happening there. So I think you can justify a modest amount of money being spent where we are getting some returns on the ground.
Further speakers? If not, who moved it? You're right. Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Carried. Okay, on to item 20. John? Sensitive expenditure policy and procedures. Questions of Ms. Do you have any? There are none. Would someone like to move it? Move Councillor Lord. So do you seconding?
No, I have a question.
Right, by all means.
In 5.5 on 20.6, it basically defines sensitive expenditure to include, but I know not limited to, travel and accommodation, entertainment, hospitality, staff support, goods and services related to expenditure, especially COHA, etc. For me, sensitive expenditure needs necessarily to include contract and tendering by staff, because the earlier definition of sensitive expenditure says on 4.4 at the bottom of 20.5, the sensitive expenditure is defined as the potential to provide or has the perceived potential to provide a private benefit to individual staff or elected members. Now, we have plenty of evidence of essentially tender fraud producing a private benefit to an individual staff or elected member.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order.
I can't remember the particular clause. The relevant bit is disrespectful, offensive or malicious language. I think that it is disrespectful to infer that there has been evidence of fraud unless the member has evidence, which I haven't seen and which he may like to table.
So do you have evidence of, you've referred to something, you've said there's plenty of evidence of fraud and you've mentioned tendering. So
Yes.
do you have any?
Yes. It's been in the newspapers for over a year now.
No, do you have any specific, sorry?
City Fleet. Has everybody forgotten City Fleet already?
Can you just, well, it wasn't tender fraud. So can I suggest that you stick to the subject, please, and carry on.
Would you like me to give personal evidence of tender fraud that I have personally given to you in the past in confidence? Would you like me to do that now in public? Because I'm quite happy to.
Councillor Vanovis, you've never given me any evidence, that's the problem. Now,
You haven't accepted
please
it.
stick to the subject and...
The subject is the definition of sensitive expenditure. If sensitive expenditure could include the kind of...
This is a question, so could you get to the question part of it?
Yes, there's an if there. If the sensitive expenditure definition could include tender and contract benefits to individual staff members, could that be included in 5.5 so that we actually have a comprehensive sensitive expenditure rather than one that basically just looks at COHA and travel and other small details?
I think the short answer is no, but I'll ask this Chief Executive to explain that, and I think the Chair of Finance has a point to make, so I'll come to you.
Just a point of clarification. The term sensitive expenditure has a particular meaning in this context, and it relates to the matters detailed here. There is a separate policy around procurement, which includes tendering and I forget the other phrase you used, Lee, sorry, tendering and contracts. So they're two separate policies, and sensitive expenditure here is the kind is and I'm using the Reader's Digest version here now, but is the kind of expenditure that mayors run off to China and purchase 72 suits on their credit card and bring them back and flog them on Trade Me when they get back. That's sensitive expenditure.
Hoping they find someone of the same size.
So it's just a different policy.
So that's the answer to your question. You have another question?
My question was actually not to you or to any elected member, it was to Ms Graham. And the question was...
Councillor Vanovis, you've asked a question, you've had it answered, do you have another question?
No, basically I have the same question, and that is the definition on 4.4, why does that not align with 5.5? Because it doesn't. 4.4 says potential to provide a private benefit to individual staff elected member. 5.5 limits the most important and I believe the most rampant problem that we have with the kind of potential.
Well, I think they're consistent, so your question's been answered. Any further questions? Councillor Wilson.
Just on page 2010, the section 3.5 on gifts and COHA, just understanding the work required with an amount of $10 being the gift that has to be gone on the register and when those can be surrendered, like a cold cup of coffee or lunch or something. I'm not quite sure. I'm just wondering logistically how this works, but also the fact that it relates also to elected members and whom we are meant to report to under this policy and when. And for a case in point is on the Regional Land Transport Committee, I get free lunches when we travel, but should I be declaring that and where to?
So there is a corresponding gifts and hospitality policy that sits alongside this for staff, and that covers off the process for our staff gifts, and that aligns with the Auditor General's best practice guidelines, and the $10 limit certainly fits within that, and the procedures we have in place are well bedded in with staff. Alongside this, we are about to run out a gifts policy for elected members, which will be written slightly differently given that you have clearly a governance role as opposed to an officer role, and that will come to you. It's on the work program over the next 3 months.
The other question is on COHA, which I just want to get, I haven't seen all the other policies that this reads with, and I can't recall seeing the word COHA in any other respect except for in the definition here under 3.5.2. But I find it, I'm just wondering whether the word should be better defined with the words in this instance, because it isn't a gift, a token or a contribution given by the DCC generally, in this instance, COHA is a well-used term, and I'm just understanding why it's in here in this term as only a gift from the DCC. I understand when we would use it of going to Mariah and giving a COHA, but this relates, in the definition given here, only to a gift by the DCC, and what the thinking was for that. But there is a financial policy that I don't understand. Sorry, 3.5.2, page 2010. What does that definition mean and why? Because it's not given any, it's not used anywhere else as far, I mean, I may have missed where else it's used. There's certainly an appendix 2 to the financial controls policy where it may be used.
Well, there's in that 6.7, that appendix is the COHA policy.
Okay. But, sorry, COHA does not mean a gift by Dunedin City Council, it means a gift generally. Is this, in this instance, as relates to this policy, that COHA means this? Which is all I ask is, can we add the words in if it's not too late, and I don't want to go back to audit and risk, but that it should be in this instance because it's taking a general word. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Cow.
Just to follow up from the earlier one, I think Ms Graham's sort of answered it, but it came back again, sort of this policy does apply to elected members. So when you say it describes itself as applying to elected members, so should it have not?
The sensitive expenditure policy in the purpose says that it does apply, and in the organisational scope to elected members.
Yes. So I'm saying that your answer earlier was we're going to do an elected members one separately, I thought, or whatever.
That was a gifts policy. So we have a gifts and hospitality policy currently for staff, and we are developing one for elected members. There is a very short statement for elected members at the moment, and I have to check which one of the supporting documents, but we are rewriting that to be more comprehensive.
So you're saying this one applies to both, but the gifts in general applies specifically to one or the other elected?
Yes, as it's currently. Yeah.
Yeah, there'll be 2 gifts and hospitality policies, one applying to staff and one applying to...
And they are different because staff make tendering decisions in particular, which means gifts, accepting gifts and accepting hospitality become potentially very fraught. And so the rules for staff are therefore quite a lot more restrictive than they're likely to be for elected members, although you get to make that decision for yourselves.
Councillor McTavish.
Right. Once again, referring to the clauses pointed out by Councillor Wilson, which are 3.4 and 3.5, all of that is worded in such a way that it does affect councillors, and so that would be that impacts the receipt of gifts by any employee or elected member must be discouraged, but when it occurs and the gift value is in excess of $10, the gift must be disclosed, recorded, and surrendered to the council. So as it is currently worded, I wouldn't have thought there was a need for an additional gift policy because that covers it.
Yes, I think you're right actually. That should refer specifically to staff, and then it should just note that the procedure for elected members is outlined in the elected members policy, and we'll get that changed.
Okay, further questions? All right, would someone like to move? Councillor Peat, and that is you're moving the the recommendations on 20.1 and 20.2, A and B. Seconded, Councillor Hall. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Peake? Any speakers? Councillor Staines.
Worship, just a clarification, that amendment, that includes that amendment. In other words, the amendment to remove the, just pointed in the direction of one for elected members as opposed to applying it in here.
Yes. Yes, and the note about the meaning of koha being with regard to this policy.
Councillor Thompson.
Look, my memory is just struggling a little bit, but just before we remove it, I think that the discussion at the Audit Committee was more around the issue of the hospitality side of things rather than the receipt of gifts, that it's just as inappropriate for councillors who may make decisions on contracts that are above a certain level or whatever, or make policy decisions that might lead to the letting of contracts, to be receiving gifts, whether of $10 or more. So I'm sorry that my memory is not clear, but I'm not sure that this is an oversight, and that in fact the difference that was discussed was primarily around hospitality, where councillors are regularly asked to attend things, to come to things that other members of the public might, for example, have to buy a ticket for. And what does one do in that situation? Or you're asked to represent the city there, or things like that. I thought that was the distinction, and that the issue of gifts wasn't different between councillors and staff. So I'm just.
I think if we're bringing the councillor gift and hospitality policy back to you to decide upon, then saying as reflected in the councillor hospitality policy will take care of that issue when it comes to you. We'll just move on that fairly quickly. And if we reference that in this document, we say, because this is currently this is agreed to with staff, this is now in the staff domain, that's been sent out, consulted on and so on. So if we say, and for councillors it's as per your document, and we get you that document as quickly as we can, then either way that will take care of it.
I don't think we should remove it. My view is I don't think we should remove it.
No, we should just note that with regard to councillors, it's outlined in your policy.
Sorry, it's about.
Does that make sense?
As I understand it, can I suggest that this goes through when we get to the gifts and policy for elected members, we can review the relationship between the two, and if necessary, amend this to make consistency across the board, but we probably won't know how to do that until we get there. But in the meantime, leave it well enough alone. Now, did someone move? Oh, that's right. And Councillor Hall seconded. So Councillor Staines has spoken to. Any further speakers? If not, I'm going to put it. Or to Councillor Peake, you wish to.
I was going to say, I welcome this because, and certainly welcome the next phase of it, which is to do with elected members, Your Worship, because I have been, I've had to ask questions about how much. To what extent, we can accept a gift of a ticket to something. My approach has been to provide a donation anyway, of an equivalent value anyway up till now, and I'll be interested to see what happens in with the new procedures. But a bigger overarching thing for me is that I think, and Ms. Graham has said it, that this is informed by the Office of the Auditor General, and I think that's an important thing from my point of view. So. Yeah, happy to.
Okay, we put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Well, that's the end of the public part of the meeting, so I will move from the chair that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely items 21 to 22, for the reasons outlined. The seconder for that, seconder Councillor Lord. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.